Hey everyone, the most commonly asked question I get in my inbox and DMs is, Canoopsy, do you still use the iPad Pro in 2022, especially with the new MacBook Pro being released, which I also bought recently as well? Many of you know, I'm a big iPad Pro fan and user, and I've used different versions of this tablet over the last 5 years. I even made a full video about it, talking about how the iPad has been part of my life and creative workflow, and how it's, at this point, irreplaceable. So the short answer to your question is yes, I still use the iPad Pro almost every single day, even though I also use the new MacBook Pro. And the long answer to your question is the rest of this video. Brought to you by Morning Brew, a free daily newsletter that helps keep you informed on all things tech, business, and finance in a truly interesting and informative way. Hit the link in the video description to subscribe to Morning Brew today. Okay, so I've said before, the MacBook Pro and the iPad Pro are two very distinct, different devices. So you might be wondering, why does the new MacBook Pro impact my usage of the iPad Pro? And that's a pretty fair question. So it comes down to a few different points. The new MacBook Pro, especially the 14-inch model which I bought, is super thin and light, it's very portable and easy to bring around, and almost the same size and footprint as the iPad Pro 11-inch with the Magic Keyboard case. So when I'm on my way out the door, it's either grabbing the iPad Pro or the MacBook Pro, because really overall, they take about the same amount of size and space in a backpack or small bag. And being a similar size and weight, what makes the decision a bit more difficult is the MacBook Pro can sometimes do things a bit better than the iPad Pro, while the iPad Pro can do things that only it can do and the MacBook can't. And all of this got me thinking about how I actually really use both of these devices, and I made a list. So I made a simple list of things I use the iPad for and things I use the MacBook Pro for. So the iPad, of course, with the Apple Pencil is a device I use almost every day in some capacity for drawing. It's also been stellar for thumbnail design and planning, storyboarding. Being able to easily write down my ideas on the iPad with the Pencil is an excellent feature. Then of course there's also wallpaper design. I've designed about 95% of all the wallpapers on my website with the iPad Pro and Procreate, and you can check out these wallpapers on my website, link in the description. I also use Keynote on the iPad for creating very simple proposals for photo or video shoots, or just creative concepts that I want to pitch to clients. Then there's simple and even intensive photo editing on the iPad. Whether it's just adjusting the colors, contrast, curves in Lightroom, great experience. And whether it's something more intensive like creating a thumbnail design or laying out text or other graphics, using apps like Affinity Photo and Affinity Designer is excellent on the iPad as well. Replying to emails is a pretty solid experience on the iPad as well, and just simple things like reading, scrolling through web pages, scrolling through social apps, it's all great on the iPad. And of course, there's just not a better device for watching movies, TV shows, and YouTube videos than the iPad. This is an excellent experience. So that's what I use the iPad Pro for, but what do I use the new MacBook Pro for? Well, the list is a hell of a lot shorter. Number 1 is video editing in Final Cut Pro. I've tried many different video editors, I've tried iPad video editors, and there are some good options out there and I can get away with using them if I have to, but Final Cut Pro is my go-to. Number 2 is Photoshop. It can be for very simple things like photo edits for social media, or more intensive things like thumbnail design, advertisements for clients, mock-ups for my website. It can get really complicated in Photoshop, and my Mac can definitely handle everything I throw at it. That's not saying the iPad can't handle these projects, but on the Mac, having the floating windows, having different projects in the tab at the very top, it just feels a bit more natural and a bit better of an experience on the bigger Mac display as well. And my third point relates to that ability of using the Mac with external displays. Now the iPad can of course mirror itself on external displays, and some apps that support it, you can have different things on the bigger display and the iPad. But turning the MacBook Pro into a full-on desk setup just by plugging it into my monitor is sometimes just what I need for a creative project or a long work session. And also, the new MacBook Pro's keyboard is really good, so for emails, sometimes it's my go-to. Now, all of this being said, those things I mentioned I use my MacBook Pro for can also all be done on the iPad Pro. It's not the best experience, it takes a bit more work, but they can all actually be done on the iPad as well with no problem, and I've done them many times before. And on the other hand, there are things only the iPad Pro can do that the MacBook Pro can't do at all. So it's kind of this really interesting imbalance between these two different devices. The iPad Pro, incredibly versatile for so many different tasks, the MacBook Pro, much better at certain tasks. So you've heard a lot about my iPad experiences and how I personally use this device, but I wanted to ask a few other big iPad fans as well what they think of the iPad Pro in 2022 and how they personally use their tablet. So, I did.
The iPad for me is hands down my favorite computer of all time. I have used it as my primary computer for years now. So on traditional computers like Macs and Windows machines, you have all these windows open in the background, things happening, and to me it's very distracting because I have ADHD. The iPad, allowing you just to have one or two apps open at a time, really helps me keep my focus, helps me stay on track for the task that I am doing.
For me, the iPad is like the ultimate note taker. I use it a lot for that, but I've also been using it loads recently for universal control, so I've been controlling my Mac and iPad with the same mouse and keyboard and everything, and that's been awesome. That's actually kind of taken over for like 80% of what I've been doing with it recently, but mainly for sketching, note-taking, and editing photos a lot as well.
So my go-to iPad right now is the iPad Pro 12.9 inch. I actually am switching to this for a minute. I was usually using the 11 inch because it's more portable, but I use it for note-taking, some web surfing, and really stuff with the Apple Pencil because, you know, this is a unique experience that you don't get with a Mac.
Now, what I would like to see from the future of the iPad, well, I'd like to see a focus on pro creative apps. For me, I would like to see Final Cut and Logic come to the iPad, those creative sides. For almost 4 years, I've edited all my videos on the iPad. It worked fairly well throughout that time, but towards the end it started to get really buggy and I just wasn't able to keep up with my production schedule. I just wasn't able to be able to turn out the quality of videos that I wanted. So I had to move that workflow over to the Mac. So I would love to see Final Cut come to the iPad and be able to bring that workflow back to the iPad and be once again all in on the iPad as my main day-to-day computer, like the computer I grab when I need to sit down and do my work.
As for where I think it will go, I'm pretty sure it will stay as like a kind of companion device. I don't see Apple changing it to its full computer. I know some people can do everything with it. I can do a lot of things with it, but not everything. So I think it will just stay as that ultimate sort of companion device to a MacBook or to a computer. Or for some people, it will be all they need for kind of those more basic tasks. And that's about it.
As for the state of the iPad Pro, when I first bought mine back in 2019, it was at its height. iPadOS 13 was super cool and it really added extra functionality that we didn't see before with iOS 12. However, now it just seems like current versions of iPadOS don't really take advantage of the hardware on the inside. So I'm really looking forward to Apple possibly, you know, bringing Pro apps and other Pro features to the iPad Pro, just to make it, you know, more Mac-like, but still distinctly iPad, if you know what I'm saying. Because if they don't, I might have to really more heavily rely on my Mac more than I already do.
So some pretty good insight overall from some other excellent iPad Pro users and YouTubers. I'll link them all in the description down below. And this leads me to talking about the future of the iPad. Now, I made a full video about what I would like to see in the next iPad Pro, but more so what I'll talk about here is what the next software update could mean for this iPad. iPadOS 16. It could be really big, or it could kind of be nothing. There really isn't a middle ground at this point. There are things that many of us want, like more enhanced multitasking, maybe a different home screen view. We want to have more pro apps on the iPad, like Final Cut, maybe the full version of Photoshop, stuff like that. And maybe we'll get one or two of those things, but at this point, it does seem a little bit unlikely. And while not getting a massive software update or Final Cut Pro on the iPad isn't going to change how I use it, it will definitely be a little bit disappointing. The current iPad is stupid powerful, and the next iPad Pro expected to have the M2 is going to be even more powerful, but what software can take full advantage of that processor and all the RAM? It just feels like untapped potential. A super powerful tablet that's thin, light, and extremely portable, but really can't do much more than the things it can currently do today. It can do a lot, but it could definitely do even more. And you might have seen some headlines like the iPad is declining year over year with sales, and it's a pretty easy explanation why. Because the iPad is just so good these days that people don't have to upgrade every year or even every 2 years. The 2018 iPad Pro to this day is still an excellent tablet and still a good purchase. So it all comes down to software. This being all said, we get back to the original question that started out this video. Do you still use the iPad Pro in 2022? And I guess, will I keep using the iPad Pro in 2022? Well, once again, the short answer is yes. If Apple didn't change a single thing in iPadOS 16, I really wouldn't mind. Now, the MacBook Pro might be the better choice for certain tasks, but the iPad Pro will always be my first choice to grab. It does things that are just not possible in any other computer, and it's incredibly fun to use and makes work and school and everything else a lot more fun. And that's the iPad Pro in 2022. I still use it, and I'm gonna keep using it. This video was sponsored by Morning Brew, a free daily newsletter delivered to you Monday through Sunday. This newsletter helps keep you informed on all things tech, business, and finance in under 5 minutes, in an informative, relevant, and quite interesting way. Recently I learned about the US solar industry and changes taking place, as well as Gucci's plans to go all in on crypto, and read a fascinating interview with talented and incredibly creative inventor Simone Giertz. And that's just a few of the many exciting subjects I've read about in Morning Brew. If you're interested in business, finance, and tech, do yourself a favor and subscribe to Morning Brew. It's completely free and takes under 15 seconds to subscribe, so hit the link in the description, subscribe to Morning Brew today, and thanks to Morning Brew for sponsoring this video. So that's pretty much it for this video. I want to hear your thoughts on the iPad Pro in 2022. What do you want to see in iPadOS 16? Let me know in the comments down below. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe, and thank you for watching.